In a world where the loudest voice often gets the most attention, society has forgotten that some of the most dangerous forces move in complete silence. Like a submarine beneath the waves, true power doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and noise. Sometimes, it waits patiently, in the shadows, watching, learning, preparing for the moment when action becomes necessary. This is the story of a woman who understood that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. While others rush to judgment based on appearances, she knew that the most effective operators never reveal their true capabilities until the mission demands it. Her quiet demeanor wasn't submission, it was discipline. Her reluctance to engage in conflict wasn't fear, it was professional restraint. What happens when a community discovers that the soft-spoken neighbor they overlooked, the quiet colleague they underestimated, and the reserved woman they dismissed actually possesses skills that most people only see in movies? What happens when years of intensive training, life-or-death missions, and unwavering dedication to protecting others collides with small-town prejudice and workplace politics? This is that story, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes, and sometimes the person you least expect is exactly the one you'd want standing between you and danger. Sarah Martinez had lived in Millbrook for exactly 18 months, and in that time, she had become the subject of endless speculation among her neighbors. The small town of 4,000 residents thrived on knowing everyone's business, but Sarah remained an enigma wrapped in polite smiles and brief conversations. She lived alone in the modest blue house on Maple Street, the one with the perfectly maintained lawn and the garden that seemed to flourish without her ever being seen tending to it. Her neighbors, particularly the group of women who gathered every Tuesday for coffee at Martha Hendricks's kitchen table, had developed elaborate theories about the quiet woman who kept to herself. "I'm telling you, there's something off about her," Martha whispered to her circle of friends, stirring her coffee with unnecessary vigor. "She's been here over a year, and we know nothing about her. No family visits, no boyfriends, no girlfriends even. What kind of person lives like that?" Betty Walsh, the self-appointed neighborhood watch coordinator, nodded emphatically. "And have you seen how she dresses? Always in those loose clothes, like she's hiding something. Plus, she never talks about her past or what she did before moving here. It's suspicious." The truth was, Sarah's past was indeed something she couldn't discuss casually over backyard fence conversations. For 12 years, she had served as a Navy SEAL, one of only a handful of women to complete the grueling training and earn the prestigious Trident pin. Her missions had taken her to corners of the world that most people couldn't find on a map, performing operations that would never make the evening news. But to her neighbors, she was simply the odd woman who worked from home doing something with computers, kept strange hours, and seemed immune to the town's social fabric. They didn't know that her loose clothing concealed a body sculptured by years of physical training that would challenge Olympic athletes. They couldn't see the scars that mapped stories of courage and sacrifice across her shoulders and arms. They had no idea that her quiet demeanor came from years of learning that observation often yielded more valuable intelligence than conversation. Sarah's morning routine began at 5 a.m. with a run through the wooded trails behind her property. She preferred the solitude of dawn, when the world was still, and she could move through the forest with the silent precision that had once been essential for survival. Her neighbors, had they been awake, would have been amazed at her speed and endurance, but they rarely rose before 7, leaving Sarah free to maintain her fitness without drawing attention. The running was more than exercise, it was meditation and reconnaissance combined. During these runs, she mapped every trail, noted every potential hiding spot, identified every approach to her property. Old habits died hard, and situational awareness had been drilled into her so thoroughly that it had become as natural as breathing. After her run, Sarah would return home, shower, and settle into her home office to begin her workday. She had transitioned from military service into cybersecurity consulting, using skills that translated well from her previous life. Her clients, scattered across the country, knew her only as a voice on conference calls, and an incredibly effective problem solver who could identify and neutralize digital threats with uncanny precision. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now protected people from threats they never knew existed, just as she had done in the military. The battlefield had changed from physical terrain to digital networks, But the mission remained the same: keep people safe by staying vigilant in the shadows. Her neighbors interpreted her professional success differently. They saw expensive equipment being delivered to her house, multiple monitors, servers, networking gear, and whispered about what someone might need with all that technology. The fact that she paid cash for everything, including her house, only fueled their suspicions. "People don't just show up in small towns with that kind of money unless they're running from something," declared Robert Chen, the local insurance agent who had processed Sarah's homeowner's policy. "She paid the entire year up front, in cash. Who does that?" What they couldn't understand was that Sarah's financial security came from years of combat pay, hazardous duty bonuses, and the disciplined saving habits of someone who had learned to live with very little. She had bought the house in cash because she valued the security of owning something outright, free from the complications of mortgages and monthly payments. The first real conflict arose during a town council meeting about the proposed construction of a new community center. The project had divided the town into two camps: those who supported the modern facility and those who preferred to renovate the existing building. The debate had grown heated over several months, with accusations of fiscal irresponsibility flying from both sides. Sarah attended these meetings as a responsible citizen, sitting quietly in the back row, listening to the arguments but never participating in the discussions. Her silence was interpreted by both sides as either lack of interest or, worse, judgment of their positions. During one particularly contentious meeting, Town Council President James Morrison pointed directly at Sarah. "We have residents in this community who can't even be bothered to engage in the democratic process," he announced, his voice carrying across the packed room. "People who sit in the back, watching and listening but never contributing. How can we make decisions for the whole community when some people act like they're above participating?" The room turned to look at Sarah, who remained motionless in her chair. Inside, she felt the familiar calm that preceded action, the mental state that had served her well when facing much more dangerous situations than small-town politics. But she also felt the discipline that had been drilled into her: assess the threat, consider the objectives, choose the appropriate response. This wasn't a battlefield. These weren't enemies. They were neighbors who didn't understand that some people processed information differently, that some people preferred to gather all available data before speaking. They couldn't know that her silence came from years of learning that premature words could compromise missions and endanger lives. Sarah stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room focus on her. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "I've been listening to these discussions for 3 months," she said, her words clear and measured. "I've reviewed the financial projections, studied the architectural plans, and researched similar projects in comparable communities. I've attended every meeting because I believe in civic responsibility, and I've remained quiet because I believe in making informed decisions rather than emotional ones." The room fell silent. This was more than anyone had ever heard Sarah say publicly. "If you'd like my input, I'm prepared to share it," she continued, "but I won't be pressured into speaking simply to satisfy someone else's idea of proper participation." James Morrison, clearly not expecting this response, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, yes. Of course, we'd welcome your perspective." Sarah pulled out a folder she had been carrying and approached the podium. What followed was a 15-minute presentation that demonstrated a level of preparation and analysis that put the town council's previous discussions to shame. She had researched construction costs, analyzed traffic patterns, studied demographic trends, and even contacted similar communities to learn from their experiences. Her recommendation was a hybrid approach that neither side had considered. Renovate the existing building structure while incorporating modern amenities and technology. She had already identified contractors, obtained preliminary cost estimates, and developed a financing plan that would reduce the tax impact on residents. By the time she finished speaking, the room was completely quiet. The two opposing sides found themselves agreeing with her proposal, and the council voted unanimously to pursue her suggested approach. As people filed out of the meeting, Sarah could hear the whispered conversations beginning. Instead of suspicion about her silence, there was now curiosity about her capabilities. How had the quiet woman who never said anything in meetings produced such a comprehensive analysis? Where had she learned to speak with such authority? What other skills might she possess? Walking home that evening, Sarah reflected on the evening's events. She had revealed more of herself than she intended, but perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. The town's perception of her was already changing, and she could sense both increased respect and intensified curiosity from her neighbors. What she didn't anticipate was that her newfound visibility would soon attract the attention of people whose interest in her capabilities would prove far more dangerous than small-town gossip. Her years of maintaining operational security had taught her that sometimes the greatest threat came not from remaining hidden but from being seen by the wrong people at the wrong time. As she unlocked her front door, Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She scanned the street for anything unusual, checked the subtle indicators she had placed around her property to detect if anyone had been there during her absence, and mentally cataloged the positions of her neighbors' cars and house lights. Everything appeared normal, but she made a mental note to increase her vigilance. In her experience, the moment you became visible was often the moment you became vulnerable. The quiet neighbor was stepping out of the shadows, and there was no telling who might be watching. The change in how Millbrook's residents viewed Sarah Martinez was immediate and noticeable. Where once they had whispered about her mysterious nature, they now spoke openly about her impressive presentation at the town council meeting. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, even ran a small article praising longtime resident Sarah Martinez for her innovative solution to the community center debate. Sarah found herself receiving invitations she had never gotten before. Martha Hendricks knocked on her door with a plate of homemade cookies and an invitation to join the Tuesday coffee group. The neighborhood book club president left a handwritten note asking if she might be interested in their monthly discussions. Even the local volunteer fire department approached her about lending her organizational skills to their annual fundraiser. For most people, this social acceptance would have been welcome. For Sarah, it represented a significant operational challenge. Every interaction was an opportunity for someone to ask questions she couldn't answer honestly. Every friendship invitation required her to maintain cover stories that grew more complex with each conversation. She had spent her military career learning to blend in, to become invisible in plain sight. But this new visibility felt different, more precarious. In combat zones, she had known who the enemies were. In Millbrook, everyone was friendly, which somehow made the situation more complicated. The first sign of real trouble came 3 weeks after the town council meeting. Sarah was returning from her morning run when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were fresh tire tracks in the soft earth beside her driveway, tracks that hadn't been there the evening before. The pattern was distinctive. High-performance tires, the kind used on expensive sedans or surveillance vehicles. More concerning was their position. The vehicle had pulled partially into the wooded area beside her property, positioning itself with a clear view of her house while remaining hidden from the road. Someone had been watching her home, and they had taken care to do it professionally. Sarah maintained her normal routine as she approached her house, but her mind was racing through threat assessments and response protocols. Inside, she immediately checked the subtle security measures she had installed throughout her property. A barely visible thread across her back door had been disturbed. The small piece of tape on her office window had been shifted. Someone hadn't just watched her house. They had attempted to gather intelligence about her living space. Her first instinct was to call her former commanding officer, but she stopped herself. This might be nothing more than curious neighbors or even petty thieves casing the property. Jumping to worst-case scenarios could compromise the quiet life she had worked so hard to build. Instead, Sarah spent the day upgrading her home's security systems. To anyone watching, she appeared to be having internet and cable services installed. In reality, she was positioning cameras and motion sensors that would give her complete coverage of her property in the surrounding area. That evening, as she reviewed the day's footage from her new surveillance system, Sarah's training paid off. She spotted him immediately. A man in his 30s, dressed casually but moving with the deliberate precision of someone with military or law enforcement experience. He had spent nearly an hour in the woods behind her property, photographing her house from multiple angles and taking notes in a small notebook. The next morning brought more disturbing news. Betty Walsh knocked on Sarah's door with information that made her stomach tighten with concern.
"I hope you don't mind me bothering you," Betty began, practically vibrating with excitement. "But I thought you should know that someone was asking questions about you yesterday." Sarah invited her in, offering coffee while trying to appear casually interested rather than deeply alarmed. "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice light.
Well, this man came by, said he was a private investigator working on behalf of an insurance company. He claimed there had been some kind of identity theft issue, and he was trying to verify information about you for their investigation. Sarah's blood went cold, but she maintained her composure. What did you tell him? Oh, I didn't tell him anything, of course, Betty said proudly. We don't really know much about you anyway, but he seemed very interested in your work schedule, whether you traveled frequently, things like that. I thought it was strange, because he already seemed to know quite a bit about you. After Betty left, Sarah immediately began implementing security protocols she had hoped never to use again. She contacted a secure communications service used by former military personnel and sent coded messages to 3 different people from her past: her former team leader, a cybersecurity specialist who owed her a favor, and a contact in federal law enforcement. The responses came within hours, and none of them brought good news. Her former team leader confirmed that several retired SEALs had recently been contacted by unknown parties asking questions about their post-service activities. The cybersecurity specialist had detected sophisticated probing attempts against databases containing military personnel records. Most troubling, her law enforcement contact reported increased chatter about potential security threats involving former special operations personnel. Someone was definitely hunting former SEALs, and Sarah's increased visibility in Millbrook had apparently made her a target. The situation escalated dramatically 2 days later. Sarah was working in her home office when her motion sensors detected movement in the woods behind her property. Her security cameras revealed 2 men moving with tactical precision through the trees, approaching her house from different angles. These weren't curious neighbors or insurance investigators. They were armed professionals conducting what appeared to be a reconnaissance mission in preparation for something much more serious. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. She secured her most sensitive equipment, activated emergency protocols on her computer systems, and prepared defensive positions throughout her house. If these people intended to harm her, they would discover that the quiet neighbor from Maple Street was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. But as she watched the 2 men through her security system, Sarah realized something that changed her entire perspective on the situation. They weren't moving like attackers preparing for an assault. They were moving like bodyguards establishing a security perimeter. One of the men was speaking into a concealed microphone, and through her high-resolution cameras, Sarah could read his lips well enough to catch fragments of his communication. Target location secure. No immediate threats detected. I recommend proceeding with contact. 20 minutes later, a 3rd vehicle arrived at her house. This one didn't try to hide. A black SUV with government plates pulled directly into her driveway, and a woman in a business suit stepped out, walked to Sarah's front door, and knocked. Sarah answered the door with her hand resting casually on the concealed pistol at her waist, but the woman immediately raised both hands in a peaceful gesture. Miss Martinez, my name is Agent Jennifer Collins with the Department of Homeland Security. I need to speak with you about a matter of national security. Sarah studied the woman's credentials carefully before stepping aside to let her in. Agent Collins was professional, direct, and clearly well-informed about Sarah's background. We've been monitoring communications from a domestic terrorist organization that has been targeting former special operations personnel, Collins explained once they were seated in Sarah's living room. They believe that veterans like yourself possess skills and knowledge that could be valuable to their operations. And they're trying to recruit former SEALs? Sarah asked. Not recruit, Collins replied grimly. They're identifying targets for elimination. This group believes that former military personnel represent a threat to their anti-government activities. They've already made attempts against 3 other veterans, including one former SEAL who was attacked at his home in Colorado. The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. The surveillance, the questions from neighbors, the professional reconnaissance of her property. It hadn't been preparation for recruitment or kidnapping. It had been target assessment for assassination. How did they find me? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Your presentation at the town council meeting was covered by the local newspaper, Agent Collins explained. The article mentioned your analytical skills and problem-solving abilities. Someone did additional research and connected your name to military records that weren't properly sealed. Sarah felt a mixture of anger and professional admiration for whoever had done that research. Finding her true identity despite her careful cover story demonstrated impressive investigative capabilities. What do you need from me? Sarah asked. Right now, we need you to be very careful, Collins replied. We believe they're still in the information-gathering phase, but that could change quickly. We can provide protection, but given your background, we thought you might prefer to handle this more proactively. Sarah considered the options. She could accept federal protection and spend the next several months or years looking over her shoulder. She could disappear again, abandon the life she had built in Millbrook and start over somewhere else. Or she could do what her training had prepared her for: neutralize the threat. What kind of proactive approach did you have in mind? Sarah asked. Agent Collins smiled for the first time since arriving. We were hoping you might be interested in helping us turn the tables on these people. Instead of waiting for them to come after you, we'd like to use you as bait to draw them out so we can capture the entire organization. The proposal was risky, but it appealed to Sarah's sense of purpose. She had spent years protecting people from threats they never knew existed. This was an opportunity to do it again, and this time she wouldn't have to remain invisible in the shadows. I'll need complete operational control, Sarah said after a moment of consideration. This is my town, my neighbors, my responsibility. If we're going to do this, we do it my way. Agreed, Collins said immediately. But Sarah, you should know that these people are professionals. This won't be like dealing with small-town politics. Sarah looked out her window at the peaceful street where children rode bicycles and neighbors tended their gardens. These people had accepted her, invited her into their community, and trusted her with their problems. They had no idea that their quiet neighbor was about to become the front line in a battle that would determine whether Millbrook remained the safe haven they believed it to be. Agent Collins, Sarah said quietly. I spent 12 years hunting the most dangerous people in the world. If someone wants to threaten my neighbors and my home, they're about to discover exactly what a SEAL can do when she stops being quiet. The plan Agent Collins and Sarah developed was elegant in its simplicity. They would make Sarah appear increasingly vulnerable, while secretly preparing Millbrook as the most well-defended small town in America. Sarah would maintain her normal routine, but with subtle changes designed to signal to the terrorist organization that she was unaware of the threat and unprepared for an attack. What the terrorists didn't know was that Sarah's normal routine was about to include some very abnormal elements. Within 48 hours of her meeting with Agent Collins, Sarah's quiet neighborhood began receiving new residents. The young couple who rented the house 3 doors down were actually federal agents specializing in surveillance and communications. The elderly man who started taking daily walks past her house was a retired Marine sniper providing overwatch. The college student who began jogging the same route as Sarah's morning runs was a cybersecurity specialist monitoring all electronic communications in the area. Sarah herself began what appeared to be a gradual relaxation of her security measures. She started leaving her curtains open in the evenings, creating perfect sight lines into her house. She began taking longer runs on more predictable routes. She even started accepting some of the social invitations from her neighbors, attending Martha Hendricks's Tuesday coffee gatherings and joining the book club. To any surveillance team watching her, Sarah Martinez appeared to be transforming from a paranoid recluse into a normal community member letting her guard down. It was exactly the impression they wanted to create. The deception worked faster than anyone anticipated. On a Thursday evening in late October, Sarah's surveillance system detected the first serious probe of her defenses. 3 vehicles positioned themselves at strategic points around Millbrook, with teams of 2 people in each vehicle conducting what appeared to be final reconnaissance before an operation. Sarah was hosting the book club meeting at her house that evening, a detail that wasn't accidental. 7 of Millbrook's most prominent residents were gathered in her living room discussing a mystery novel, completely unaware that they were surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block. At 9:30 p.m., as the book club members were preparing to leave, Sarah received a coded text message on her secure phone. Package delivery scheduled for tonight. All units in position. The attack began at 10:15 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after the last book club member had driven away. Sarah was in her kitchen, apparently washing dishes, when her motion sensors detected movement from multiple directions. Through her concealed cameras, she watched as 6 armed figures approached her house with military precision. They were good. Their equipment was top quality, their movement coordinated, their communication disciplined. Under different circumstances, Sarah might have been impressed by their professionalism. But these people had made a critical error in judgment. They had mistaken her silence for weakness, her quiet demeanor for vulnerability, her integration into the community for complacency. They were about to learn that some of the most dangerous predators in the world are those that hunt in perfect silence. The first indication that this wouldn't go according to their plan came when the team member assigned to disable her power supply discovered that cutting the electrical lines to her house had no effect on her security systems. Sarah had installed independent power sources for all critical systems, a precaution that now provided her with continued surveillance capabilities while her attackers assumed they were operating in darkness. The second indication came when the team member approaching her back door triggered a motion sensor that activated floodlights throughout her backyard. Instead of revealing Sarah's position, the lights exposed the attackers, while Sarah remained concealed inside her house. But the real surprise came when Sarah's voice emerged from speakers positioned around her property. "This is Sarah Martinez," her calm, authoritative voice announced. "You are surrounded by federal agents and are in violation of multiple federal laws. You have 30 seconds to drop your weapons and surrender." The response was immediate and violent. The attack team opened fire on her house, using high-powered rifles to shatter windows and penetrate walls. They had clearly decided that their mission was more important than taking prisoners. They had just made their final mistake. Sarah had spent 12 years learning to operate in environments where the difference between life and death was measured in milliseconds and inches. Her house had been prepared for exactly this scenario, with reinforced walls, bulletproof glass, and defensive positions that would allow her to control the engagement. What happened next lasted less than 4 minutes, but those 4 minutes demonstrated why Navy SEALs represent the pinnacle of military training and capability. Sarah emerged from her house like a force of nature. Using the cover of darkness and her intimate knowledge of the terrain, she moved through her property with silent precision. The first attacker went down to a perfectly placed shot from her concealed position near the garden shed. The second fell victim to a booby trap she had prepared along the most likely approach route from the woods. The remaining 4 attackers, realizing they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated, attempted to withdraw to their vehicles and escape. That's when they discovered that Agent Collins hadn't been exaggerating when she said they would provide support. The elderly man who had been taking daily walks past Sarah's house materialized from the darkness with a sniper rifle, taking down the team leader with a shot from over 300 yards. The young couple from 3 doors down emerged from concealment with automatic weapons, cutting off the attacker's escape route. The college student, who had been jogging Sarah's routes, activated jamming equipment that disabled all communications and GPS devices the attackers were carrying. Within 6 minutes of the first shot being fired, all 6 attackers were either dead or in federal custody. The threat to Sarah and her community was neutralized with surgical precision and overwhelming force. But the real revelation came the next morning, when the residents of Millbrook woke up to discover that their quiet neighborhood had been the site of a federal anti-terrorism operation. News vans arrived before breakfast. FBI crime scene investigators cordoned off Sarah's entire block. Agent Collins held a press conference in front of the town hall, explaining that a domestic terrorist organization had been planning to assassinate a decorated military veteran, but their plot had been uncovered and thwarted through the cooperation of the veteran and federal law enforcement. The people of Millbrook found themselves thrust into a national news story, and at the center of it all was their quiet neighbor, who had just revealed herself to be one of the most highly trained warriors in American military history. Martha Hendricks stood in her front yard, staring at Sarah's house where crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, trying to process what she had learned. The woman who had sat quietly in her kitchen just 12 hours earlier, politely discussing mystery novels and offering thoughtful insights about character development, was actually a Navy SEAL who had just fought and won a battle against trained killers. "I can't believe it," she said to Betty Walsh, who was equally stunned. "All this time we thought she was just antisocial or maybe hiding from a bad marriage. She was actually one of those special forces people you see in movies." Betty shook her head in amazement. "Remember how we used to wonder why she was so quiet and never talked about herself? She couldn't talk about herself. She was probably off fighting terrorists and saving people's lives while we were here gossiping about her garden." The transformation in how Millbrook's residents viewed Sarah was complete and immediate. The woman they had once considered mysterious and antisocial was now recognized as a hero who had risked her life to protect their community. The silence they had interpreted as weakness was now understood as the quiet strength of someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others. But perhaps the most profound change was in Sarah herself. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt fully integrated into a community that knew and accepted her true identity. She no longer had to maintain elaborate cover stories or deflect personal questions. Her neighbors understood why she kept unusual hours, why she maintained such strict security measures, why she sometimes seemed distant or preoccupied. More importantly, they appreciated these qualities instead of fearing them. 3 weeks after the attack, Sarah attended her first town council meeting since the incident. When she entered the room, the entire assembly rose in spontaneous applause. James Morrison, the council president, who had once criticized her for not participating enough in community discussions, approached her with tears in his eyes. "Martinez," he said, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We mistook your professionalism for indifference, your strength for aloofness. You've been protecting people your entire adult life, and when danger came to our community, you protected us too." Sarah's response was characteristically quiet and direct. "This is my home," she said simply. "These are my neighbors. Protecting the people and places we care about isn't something we do for recognition or gratitude. It's something we do because it's right." The community center project that had once divided the town was completed 6 months later, incorporating all of Sarah's original recommendations. A small plaque near the entrance reads, "Dedicated to all those who serve in silence to keep our communities safe." Sarah's life in Millbrook settled into a new rhythm after the attack. She continued her cybersecurity consulting work, but now she also served as an unofficial security advisor to the town council. She joined the volunteer fire department, where her leadership skills and crisis management experience proved invaluable. She even started teaching a women's self-defense class at the new community center. But, perhaps most importantly, she had learned that true strength didn't require hiding in the shadows. The skills and experiences that had once isolated her from civilian life could actually enrich her connections with the community around her. On quiet evenings, as she tended her garden or sat on her front porch watching neighbors walk their dogs, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from the battlefields of distant countries to this peaceful street in small-town America. She had spent years believing that her military service was something to conceal, that her capabilities would frighten or alienate civilian friends. Instead, she had discovered that people were capable of remarkable understanding and acceptance when given the chance. They didn't fear her strength. They respected it. They didn't resent her skills. They were grateful for them. The woman who had once been mistaken for weak because of her silence had become the most trusted and respected resident of Millbrook. She had learned that true integration into a community didn't require hiding who you are. It required finding people worthy of knowing the real you. Sarah Martinez, retired Navy SEAL, had finally found her way home. And home, she discovered, was not a place where you had to hide your strength, but a place where your strength could serve a purpose greater than yourself. In the end, they had mistaken her silence for weakness. But silence, Sarah knew, was just another word for choosing your battles wisely. And when the battle came to her doorstep, threatening the people she had grown to love, her response had been swift, decisive, and utterly without mercy. That was the true strength of a SEAL, not the absence of violence, but the discipline to use it only when absolutely necessary, and the skill to use it perfectly when that moment arrived.